Okay, hello everyone. I am going to be creating an accompanying video for Lab 4.3, and this is just to help out all those that weren't able to make our Friday class. I'm going to do it a little bit different this time, and this is just to help you navigate it a little bit better because it's going to be a rather long video. So I'm going to break it into parts. The ultimate goal is to finish Lab 4.3. I'm going to walk you through every single reporter block that we're actually going to be creating in it. But I'll start out with the setup right now, and then each block will have like a title screen, so you can kind of scan through the video and find out like which block you need to kind of work on. So hopefully this will actually help you out a little bit better navigating through it. But ultimately, the whole video will have all 5 reporter blocks that we're actually going to be creating for this lab. So if you go all the way through the video, you'll be able to actually do every single block and be able to finish your lab 4.3 with 100% credit. Okay. As usual, we want to go into Snap, right? Go into Snap. Basically, do your login. Make sure that you log in. Once you log in, you're going to create a file that is called Lab 4.3 and put your last name. Okay? And I'm not going to replace it because I already have one saved there. But basically, that's the intention. What you want to do is you want to set it up with that file name. So then you have that file, right? And it'll end up being called Lab 4.3 with your last name. Okay, so let's start getting ready. What you need to do is pull up that document that is actually going to be associated with the assignment, and it actually has the 5 custom reporter blocks that we're actually going to be building. And this time we're going to be building on using lists again, but we're going to be using lists as the argument that's actually going into the custom blocks. Okay. Okay, so this first custom reporter block that we're actually going to be creating is the sum all block. Now, the difference in what we're actually going to be doing when we create these custom blocks is we're going to be using a list as our argument. And the first time I did the lesson on custom blocks, I really didn't go into how we could adjust our arguments. I'm going to kind of mess with that right now to show you some of the things that you can actually do. So you can choose other areas to work in, but as I stated before, talking with a lot of you, you can create a custom block in any category. It's just up to where you want to create it yourself, just to help kind of organize things better for yourself. So I'm just going to work in motion today as we create all these custom blocks. Okay. So in motion, we're going to make a block, and we're going to be making a block that's a reporter block, so make sure we select reporter. Okay. And we're going to let's call it sum all, or sum of all. Okay. And then with this block, of course it pops up and it's actually showing you the title of the block itself. And because it's a reporter block, there's going to be a value that we're kind of spitting out from the block itself when it's actually runs its script inside it. But to add an argument, you push that plus sign all the way to the right in the title of it itself. So one thing that I really didn't go over, when we're creating a name for our argument, I never pushed this little button before, because automatically when it actually creates your argument, you can put anything in it. Like you can initially put anything in it. But you can also adjust this by pushing that arrow, and then it's actually going to give you a list of stuff. Now, per the lab, we want to make sure that we're inputting a list. Now, granted, you can keep that any type if you want, but I would prefer let's select list itself so we know that we're actually going to be sending a list in, okay? And then make sure it's still selected to single input. So single input, but make sure that we're sending a list in. And then let's just call this the number list that we're sending in. So now we have a number list going in here. Okay. So since we're inputting a list, it's not guaranteed how many values are actually going to be in how many items are going to be in that list. So one thing that you want to do is create some sort of control, some sort of way to know the value of what's actually happening, of what's actually being entered into our custom block that we're creating here. And one thing that we know, like anytime we actually have a list, we can always find the value of how many items are in there by using the length of block, right? So that number list is that list that we're actually inputting, and we can put it right here. And that length of number list is basically going to give us the value of how many items are actually in the list that we've actually created. And just for all intents and purposes, I usually try to create a variable that we'll actually use as our control numbers. Instead of using like default things like this, it's better to be able to control your values. So creating an extra value that you can actually put this number into, so you actually kind of have a set, is definitely a good way to control what's happening in your script itself. So let's make a variable and call it counter, just because this is a term that you would use for like a controlled loop. So you actually have a counter inside your controlled loop. And then also, let's also make another variable, and let's call this index number. And the intent behind that is, if we're actually trying to look at every single different number that's actually being put into this list that's going in here, we want to be able to control the item number in that list. So having some sort of variable that we can actually adjust and everything, so we can actually see all the different values of that list that's actually being inputted, is definitely an important thing. As stated before in the Friday lecture that I gave, it's always good if you're creating variables to kind of set it to a null. So basically like zeroing it out. So let's make sure that we zero out our counter. But starting out, the index number, if we use that index number like in a list and everything, we don't necessarily want a zero, right? So let's set our initial point for our index number to 1. And the intent of that is, if we're cycling through, if we're going through so many times, we want to be able to start with the index number being 1, just because we don't have anything in a list that's at a 0 point, because there is no 0 point, right? Unless it's a null set, but we're not entering a null set for that intent to begin with. So let's create a controlled loop. Okay, so we're going to do a repeat for so many times, and since we know that the value of the length of the number list, we can actually make the length of the number list actually, let's set that to counter. Okay, so instead of our counter being set to 0, we're just going to set our counter to the length of the number list, and then our counter now becomes the control of how many times that this loop is going to go through. So now if we enter a list of 7 different numbers, we know that those 7 different numbers can actually go in there, and they will actually go through 7 different times, because we actually will cycle through this 7 times, just to help us out. And then knowing that we want to cycle through and look at each number in the list itself, one thing that we can actually do is we're going to use a change block, so we know that we can actually cycle through each value on that list that is actually being inputted. Okay, so let's grab change by 1. Let's change the index number by 1. But knowing that we're going to change it, we want to do that after whatever we're actually going to be doing in this loop, because we already set the null to 1 to begin with. So we don't want to change it yet. We want to be able to use that first value anyways. So let's think about what we have to do in this custom block. In this custom block, we have to create a sum of all the values that are actually being put in the list, correct? So let's actually come up here and make another information bucket. And then this one we will actually just call sum, because we actually want to sum all the values of what's actually happening in this. And then again, let's set sum to a null, so we don't have junk in there to begin with. So it's set to 0 initially. But what we want to do while we go through our controlled loop is we want to add each number of the list to our sum. Okay, so we can come in here and let's set the value of sum and use an operator at this point. What we're going to do is we're going to add to the value of sum the item in the list. So we have this, right? Item in this number list, whatever item number we have, but we made that index number so it can actually cycle through, right? So if we put that here, what's actually going to happen is when it first goes through, it's going to take the first item, the first item in the list, and it's going to add it to sum, and then sum will become that value, right? Then we change the index number by 1, and then when it cycles back through, it's going to add the next number, and so on and so forth. Okay? So, with that being said, if we have a number list of 6 different numbers, it's going to cycle through the 6 different times and add every single one of those numbers, and then it's going to have the value of everything added together in that sum block, right? So that's what we want to report. We want to report the value of sum as the final product. Okay? So let's apply that. Hit OK. And let's check to see how everything panned out. So we got our sum of all block. And then let's create a list of numbers and check it. Let's put a total of 6 values. And then remember, you can hit tab to easily go through and type. So let's 5, 6, -6, 0, 5, and 2. And just looking at that, 5 plus 5 is 10, 6 plus -6 is 0, 0 plus 0 is 0, so we have 10 plus 2 more, which would be 12. So if we put this list in here, and everything worked correctly for sum of all, it should give us 12. And it reports 12. Boom. That is our sum of all block. Cool. Okay, now we're working on block 2. And if you look at the lab report, in lab 4.3, we actually have the next reporter block that we actually want to create is an average of all the numbers in the list. Okay, so let's go back up here to motion. You can choose another category if you want, but just to make it easier, we're going to stay in motion for the time being. In motion, we're going to create a average reporter block. And then for this reporter block, we are once again going to add a list, make sure it's single input, of numbers. So in all truth, one thing that we can actually do is we can use the sum of all that we already created, have numbers come in for our sum of all, okay? Because we know that we're actually going to create a the sum for the sum of all, and then when we have an average, we want to be able to take the average of that. But what number do we need to divide it by? Well, the number that we actually need to divide by is in fact the length of the list, right? So if we have the length of the list and we take that and then sum of all, and we have that, and then we divide, that will in fact give us our average, correct? This might be a little bit of an experiment. I might have tried it already. We'll see. We'll see what happens, right? So let's make another variable and let's call it average value. Okay. And what we want to do is we want to set average value to this. And then we want to report average value. We apply this bad boy. This should in fact work. And boom. If we look at that list right there, you can tell that it is very close to 2 because there's so many 2's in it. We have one value that's 6, that's way higher, and then the 1 and the 3 would balance out to 2 more 2's effectively. So we could technically say we have 5 2's, a 1, and a 6. So of course the average value would actually be very close to 2 itself. But we can also alter this list to something that we know would be the actual average value. So if we put 5, 5, 5, 6, 6, 6, and then in this one we'll put 5.5, we should in fact get an average of 5, correct? Or sorry, 5.5. That does make sense. So, and in all truth, it works out, and we actually get 5.5. So it does look like this next reporter block that we actually did actually did work out. And as you might have noticed, one thing that you can do in programming, which is very cool, is something that you've already created as far as script or code goes, you can actually use into a next step, so you can basically solve one problem to help solve another problem, which is one of the cool things about computer programming. You can actually build on what you've already created, and it actually makes it basically an easy step-by-step process, which helps out a lot. So that is our average custom block that we just created. Okay, so now we're on to block 3. And for block 3, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a custom reporter block, and we're still using a list as an argument. But in this one, the output that we actually want, the output of the reporter itself, is basically just going to be Boolean, because we're going to be giving a true or a false as output. What we actually want to do with the list itself is we want to look at each value, and we actually want to see if the list itself has any negative values in it whatsoever. We're going to report that it's true, and then if none of the values are negative, then it will be our non-negative is I guess the better term, because 0 is technically not positive or negative. It is a non-negative. But that will give us a value of false if the whole list has nothing that is a negative value in it. Okay, so as I was saying, like when we created the average block, you can still code from your other blocks that you've created just to make it a little bit easier. It's really up to you. Sometimes it makes it more difficult, because then you got to figure out what you need to use and what you don't need to use. So I've decided that we're going to kind of do this one from scratch, even though you can steal the code from one of the previous blocks if you want to. But let's make this block as a negative. Okay, and it's a reporter block. We're going to add an argument. Come over here. Make sure we're doing single input list. Let's call it number list. And let's start making stuff. So one thing, like in the other blocks that we were making, let's make sure that we have a variable that we can actually use as a counter. Okay, and then let's also make our other variable that is basically going to be the index number. So we have those two values, and like before, we definitely want to set our counter to the value of that length of our list, and then we want to set our index number to 1, because we're going to be cycling through that, right? And then let's make a variable, and let's call it negative count. Okay. And the reason we're going to make this variable is because we want to be able to see if we actually have any negatives in the list, right? So we're going to basically create a data bucket that kind of is a placeholder to let us know if we get any negative values as we cycle through all this. So null set it. Let's set it to 0 to begin with, and then we're going to go into our conditional loop. Okay. So for our conditional loop, still grab the repeat, and then we're definitely going to repeat it the number of items that are in the list. So what we'll end up doing is we're going to test every value that's in the list, and we're going to test to see if it's negative or not. Okay, so if we go in here in the operators, if this stuff is less than 0, so let's grab this item, index number, of our list. Oops. And if it's less than 0, so let's grab a conditional statement. If and that reads 0 greater than the given item number, but it's the same thing. You could flip it and have the item number thing less than 0, however you want to do it. Same thing. Let's change the counter of the negative count. So let's change that by 1 if that happens. And then so we can basically go through all of that. We're going to want to add 1 to the index number as well, right? So let's add 1 to the index number. And like before, we want to do the operation before we change that value, because we already set it equal to 1 to begin with. So it will cycle through and check every single number. And then the only thing that we're changing through our operation is we're changing the negative count. Okay, so at this point, let's think about some conditional statements that we can actually make, because now our control that we have is our negative count. That's either going to be 0 if we don't have any negatives, or it will be greater than 0 if we do actually have a negative or not, correct? So let's make a couple more conditional statements. So if negative count is equal to 0, that means none of them are negative. What do we want to report? Well, then we report that this is false because we don't have any negatives at all. Okay? Then, if, let's actually duplicate this so we don't have to recreate it, and we're going to make our conditional statement for true. So if negative count is greater than 0, because we actually have a count on it. So if there's any value whatsoever that has been a negative number, our negative count would have went up, right? So that will give us true. So now we've set the conditions for both false and true. Let's apply that. Let's check to see what we got. So as a negative, let's check it a couple times with some different lists just to make sure that we did this well. So let's create some lists. Let's try it with 0, 9, 2, 7, 6. And this should give us a false. It does. So now let's put 8, negative 12, negative 5, 7, and 0. Let's check this. It gives us true. Okay. So 0, 0, 0, 0. No positives, no negatives, but it should still give us a false. It gives us a false. So we're good to go. And that is our has a negative block onto block 4. Okay, block 4. And this is where it starts to get really interesting because for block 4, what we need to do is we need to create a custom reporter block that we're actually going to throw a list in there. And what it's actually going to check, it's going to check to see if every single number as it goes is greater than the value of the number previous to it. So basically, we're going to be doing an incremental check all the way through to make sure that there's increasing value or it's equal in value. So the intent is to basically, at the end of it, basically the largest number should be at the end of the list if, in fact, the Boolean the Boolean report is actually true. Okay, so let's go back into motion. Let's create a block. Let's make sure it's a reporter block, and we're going to call it increasing value. Then we want to add an argument. Make sure that we have selected list. It's a single input, and we'll call this the number list. There's definitely some things that we're going to want to make sure that we have in here. A lot of our controllers. So let's make a counter. Let's make a variable index number. And then let's make another variable called next number. There's a reason for this. Because we're going to be comparing two numbers in the list. So we basically want two indexes, but it might be confusing if you call it like index 1, index 2, like it's up to you, whatever you want to name it. But the intent is to be able to compare those two numbers in the list itself. Okay, and then let's make one more variable. Let's call this increasing. Okay, so we have index number, we have next number, and we have counter. And then we also have increasing. So starting out, we definitely want to do some nulls, right? So for the counter, let's set counter equal to length of the number. But if we're going to be doing a comparison, okay, let's think about this logically. Like if we have a list of 6 numbers, are we going to have to do this 6 times, or will we have to do it a different number of times? Because we're comparing 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and so on and so forth. So the last comparison we would have to do would be 5 to 6, so we don't have to do it the full number of times of the counter. We can actually subtract 1 from this, correct? So let's actually throw an operator in here and subtract 1 from this value. because that's actually what we can set our counter to, because that's how many times we're going to have to do our repeat. Now, for our other set values, let's still set our index number to 1, but let's set our next number to 2. And the reason for this is the first time we go into that counter, we want to compare the second number in the list to the first number in the list, because we're checking to see if it's increasing in value or the same, correct? So we want to do a conditional, right, that is going to see either equal or greater than situation. And that conditional is going to be also using an or, because it could be one or the other, right? So the things that we're going to have to compare is our item number in the list, right? Oops. It's in this list of index number and of next number. Let's actually duplicate both of those, because we want to see if they're equal or if next number, so next number needs to be the greater one. Than index number. So that's going to check both those conditions, and if that is true, we know that it's increasing, right? So we can change our increasing by 1, knowing that this is true, so we can actually go up by 1. So let's get a control here of a conditional if, put this in as our condition, and then we're going to change increasing by 1 if this is a true statement. And then we want to do this, this number of counter times, but we also want to check this condition for everything in the list, right? So what we definitely need to do is we also need to change the values of both our next number and our index number, right? So index number by 1 and next number by 1. And it will keep on checking, and it will do the comparison properly. So it's going to go all the way through, and the only changing value that we have through this, besides the index number and the next number, because we just want to check everything in the list, is that increasing. So basically that increasing variable is what we actually need from this, so we can actually see if functionally we actually have increasing value the whole time. But we're using this as a control, and we're adding 1 every single time that that statement is true. So when we do the conditional coming out of this, we want to verify that this true statement happened every single time, right? So if it happened every single time, the value of increasing should be equal to the value of our counter, correct? So we can put this right there. Let's grab a conditional statement. And if this in fact is true, actually let's do it like this instead. Let's use an if-else statement. So if this is true, we're going to report true. Else, we're going to report false. Actually, I could have just done it like that. So looking at that, if we did it correctly, we should actually have the ability to check every condition. Okay, so let's make a few of them. And then let's make a few lists to see if we actually did this bad boy right. Let's put at least 5 values in there. And we'll start out just by putting the same value all the way through. And that should actually give us true. It gives us true. So let's do next. We'll do one increasing and then we'll drop, but then we'll go increasing again. But this should actually give us false. And it gives us false. Okay? Let's just go up and then put a negative right there. Let's see what happens. This should also give us false. It gives us false. Okay? And then let's go negative, less negative, 0, 5, 10. And then this should give us true. That one did not work. So let's think of why that one did not work. Increasing should have been went up by 1 the whole time. Oh! So one thing that we forgot to do is we forgot to set increasing to 0 to begin with. So let's set increasing to 0 to begin with. And there we go. And that was active debugging. Yep. And see, that actually helps out because I know I talk about the setting a null all the time. It's important to set a null because if you don't set your null, see, it made that that not work correctly, but this time it actually worked when we actually put the null in there to reset it, basically. So now everything works. Bravo. On to block 5. Okay, so we've made it all the way through. We've done our first 4 custom blocks, and now we're on to the custom reporter block number 5, that we're actually going to use a list as an argument. And this one, we're trying to get the max value of the list. So whatever list we put in there, we're trying to regurgitate out the max value. That's actually happening. Now, the cool thing is, because of what we did in the 4th custom block of creating like the increasing value, we can actually steal a lot of that code and actually use it in our next in creating this custom block. So if we go in here and we actually make a new block, and let's call this one maximum. Oops, let's make sure it's a reporter. And we're going to call this one maximum value. And we're going to create a list, a single input, call it number list. We can actually steal this code because pretty much everything we need here is definitely important because I kind of alluded to it when I was talking about block number 4 when we were making it. If in fact the statement comes all the way through as true, we definitely actually have our maximum value as that comes out. But if it's not true, then there's something else that has to happen. So if we know that the condition is true, we can actually change this report to being the last number in the list, right? And that last number is not going to be next number, or it's not going to be next number or the index number. It's going to be it's actually going to be the value. Sorry, it's going to be the value of index number and not next number, correct? Because we've been increasing this the whole time as we go through. Actually, no, I take that back. It should be this. So it should in fact be the item number that is index number of this list. So that will work. Okay. So if it goes through and all the conditions are set to true, and it basically gives us that true report, then we can actually just report that last number because we know that that's actually going to be the maximum value. The difference is if it didn't actually increase the whole time, we would actually have a different scenario. Okay? So we're going to have some sort of different control. Now, the way that we can do that is we can take this if statement here and we can alter it a little bit by changing it to an if-else statement. Okay, so if we grab an if-else statement and then we put the condition back in there, and then if that happens, we do still change that. Okay, and we still want to change the indexes as we go through this, and we're going to put that back in the counter. So we're still doing everything, except we have a different area of this else. And what we're actually going to do with this else is, let's create another variable, and we're going to call this variable the max number. Okay? So the reason that we're creating this variable is because it will actually retain the value of whatever the max number is anytime that the value doesn't increase. Okay? So as we go, remember we're checking every single condition as we go through the whole thing. So what we can do is, if this statement is different, we can change this to basically set the max number at the index number of the number list at the time, because the condition was not satisfied, if that makes sense. Because if it does make, if this condition is met, then we increase the increasing by 1 and we keep on cycling through. But if it's not met, then we're going to set the max number value to whatever the number that is actually greater at that time is. And then as it goes through the whole thing, it's going to keep on checking, so it will still set max number to whatever is actually the largest number at the time. And then in this case, instead of reporting false, we can just report max number. So just by doing this little change, this in fact should give us the results for maximum value, the same as when we did increasing value. So let's apply this and see if in fact we did this right. So with this list, here it still gives us our true value, but when maximum value, it gives us 2, which is true. Like throughout that whole thing, the biggest number is 2. Okay. So in this case, it still works for increasing value, but now we put it in here, and it should give us 4. It gives us 4. In this next one, we look at this whole list, and the biggest number is actually 6. So if we put it in there, remember this still gives us false, and it does give us 6. And then last but not least, let's check this list and see if it actually works. Put this list in there, and lo and behold, it gives us the value of 10, which is true. And there you have it. That's the 5th custom block. They're all complete. So basically that completes the lab. I hope that you were able to kind of follow along. Like I said, I'm setting up this video to give it title blocks as you go through it. This will actually help you kind of go through and pinpoint which areas you want to go to if you're looking for a specific block that you need to work on because you don't understand it. And then also the reason I set this video up like this is so you can test yourself. So maybe you don't have to follow along through the whole video. You can try to do some of the blocks on your own, and then if you're really struggling on a certain block, then jump into the video for that block itself and actually look at it as you go through. But hopefully this helps out a lot. I'm hoping that that you can use these concepts and how you kind of build that logic of what you need to do, because because as we go on to the next half of the class, as we start to get into Python, a lot more scripting coding where you're typing stuff out, but you still have to use that kind of formulation and logic when you actually go through your programming, so you can create kind of a as I said way in the beginning of this course, like you're creating kind of an artificial intelligence, a way for the computer code itself to kind of problem solve for you and think about things and do kind of solution sets for you. But like I said, hopefully this helps you out. And this video is going to be available to you if you need to kind of just look at it for a refresher or whatever you need it for. But awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great day. And I will be seeing you in virtual class.